As you dig further down, you get to really uncover the true need, and then you've got much more latitude to come up with creative solutions.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Sourcing Hero podcast. I'm Catherine, and today I have Nick Gunn from the NiVACK group on the show with us today. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hi, Catherine. I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Pretty great. It's so good to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here.
So you're with the NiVACK group, CEO and founder, I might add, and you've been in procurement for 21 years. Is that right?
That's right. I did probably 20 years as an actual procurement practitioner, and the last couple of years I've been on the other side, on the dark side, as an executive advisor.
On the dark side. So the majority of your time, though, was spent at Hewlett Packard.
Yeah, that's right. Hewlett
Okay.
Packard, and then we split the company in 2015, and I stayed with Hewlett Packard Enterprise.
So you have so much experience, years of experience, and we'll get to that later. But I'm wondering, with all of the experience that you have in such a large corporation, I think your perspective is going to be a little bit different than some of the guests we've had on so far. From your perspective, what is a sourcing hero?
So it's a great question. A sourcing hero is really from the I think about it from the eyes of the client. So the client of the sourcing person, they might call them stakeholders, they might call them internal customers, but the client's perspective is really important, and that to me kind of defines what a sourcing hero is. A sourcing hero to me is somebody that takes time to understand the client's needs, to really understand the business that they operate in, and really understand what it is that they need to be successful. The sourcing hero then takes that information and turns that into an approach whereby he or she can deliver the value that that client, that internal customer, that internal stakeholder really needs. And that value is how I determine what it takes to be a sourcing hero.
I love that. So incredible listening skills and understanding. It really starts with the actual client.
That's right. Yes.
With that in mind, I'm curious. There was probably a time or two in your career at Hewlett Packard where you came to that conclusion on the best way moving forward to become a sourcing hero, taking that listening and consultative approach. Tell me about a time where you had to learn that lesson, either, good or bad.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually learned the lesson when I was running logistics for HP in the UK before I came to the US. And I wasn't doing sourcing at all as it happened, but I had to sell, if you like. I had to influence some senior leaders in the company in the UK on our new logistics strategy, and I spent a lot of time preparing it. I spent a lot of time preparing to meet with these guys. I spent a lot of time putting together, the right kind of presentation. I tried to think about all the questions and stuff that they may have, so that I could give them great answers. And I went into the meeting and did the presentation, and it was just horrible. I basically felt like I went into a hornet's nest, and it didn't matter what I was talking about. They really weren't interested. And I really took it to heart. And I spent a little bit of time sort of introspectively looking at that. And I thought to myself, why is it that I got that so wrong? I did a ton of prep and I really did a lot of planning for it. And then the only thing I could think of was that the only people I didn't involve in my prep work was the customers, the people that I was trying to influence. I didn't spend enough time thinking about the situation from their perspective. I was thinking about it from my perspective, my objectives, my goals, and how the solution would really, and honestly, I can't even remember what it was that I was talking about. I just remember how it made me feel and how it influenced my thinking in the future. But I had spent all the time sort of being introspective, thinking about how it was going to work for me, what the outcome was going to be for me, for my team, for my objectives. I didn't spend enough time thinking about the perspective of the people that I was trying to influence, and didn't take the time to understand the broader picture. I thought, you know what, I'm going to test that. So I went back to some of those leaders that I presented to, and a little bit tail between the legs, and I said, hey, give me some feedback on this. I did these things, and this was what I was thinking. This was how I approached it. I asked them the question, did I understand your perspective clearly? And they all said no. They all
Oh
said no.
man.
And it was enlightening. It was like one of those aha moments where you think, wow, okay, I wish I'd have known that going in. And it really made me think very differently about perspectives and why they're important.
I think that's still an age-old challenge for people in sales especially, but there are other roles out there. Any role where you're trying to influence somebody else. I just had a conversation with someone this week about it. I was in a demo for another piece of software, and at no point did the salesperson ask me what my needs were and what I wanted. He went right into all the features and the benefits, and half of which I didn't need. And so he kind of missed the mark. And I left that call feeling like, well, I don't think that my needs are a priority. Probably not going to go with that product because I don't even know if they have what I want.
Sure.
So you learned early on, and I love that you had that inclination right after the presentation where you started to think about it and you asked for the feedback. The feedback is so important.
That's right. And it was kind of hard to take as well. I was a lot younger. I was probably in my late 20s. And when you get that feedback, you kind of, you're at that kind of age, you think you're invincible and stuff. And, then you get in that feedback. It's hard to take. It's hard. It's a real, you got to take it on the chin and say, what am I going to do with this? But it's one of the things that has really, I feel, put me in a good position for the rest of my career. It's what I coach people. When I coach people, I always try to coach people on perspectives, understanding what the other person wants. Even if you're in a negotiation, the first thing I try to do is figure out the motivations of the person that I'm negotiating with. What is going to make them a hero in their company? They have to come back with a win of some sort. You can't just beat them up so that they lose and you win. You have to figure out what's going to make them look good. And hopefully, what you can do is give them something, they can give you something, and you both come away winners. I know it kind of sounds cliched, but that is, you really only get that by sort of listening and asking insightful questions, questions that are going to give you that kind of insight.
So after you got that feedback after that initial presentation that didn't go so well, did you have another chance with the same group, or did you just apply that feedback for the next project?
I did get another chance with that same group, and the next time around, I did a lot more due diligence, if you like, upfront, working with some of those folks themselves and also their delegates, understanding their perspective, what was important to them. And then the other thing that I did was I put it together in more of a sort of layman's story when I presented. And I started to drop a lot of the sort of technical elements because these folks didn't think about what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. They maybe thought about logistics once a quarter. So what I did, I started to think about how do I tell a story here with a beginning, middle, and an end that gets me what I want to get, that educates these guys quickly, so bringing them up to speed, and then I can sort of influence. So I did get a second chance to go back, and I did much better, which made me feel good, and we were able to sort of move the project forward. But I mean, on the scale of things, it was sort of very small as I look back over my career, but it's one of those things that held me in good stead when I had to do this on much more senior levels in the future.
Can you tell me about one of those bigger times where you had to use your storytelling and your listening skills to get something done?
Sure, I can. One of the last things that I did before I left HPE, I was involved in something we called HPE Next. It was transformational after we'd separated the company. We were trying to transform it. And I was one of the functions I ran included procurement, but I also ran real estate for the company. And we needed to dramatically reduce our real estate portfolio because we were much smaller. But emotionally, all of the business leaders were kind of holding on to, I need this site and I need this site and I need this, and this. So what I actually did was I put the information together from a data perspective so that we weren't talking about emotional things, we were talking about facts. But I started with when I started my presentation to the senior leaders, including the CEO, I started with a question. My question was, who in the company thinks we should spend more on real estate than we spend on either marketing or R&D? And nobody put their hand up. And then I said, great. So nobody thinks we should spend more on real estate. And then I unveiled my first slide that showed we actually spend more on real estate than we did on marketing and R&D. And what I'd done was kind of immediately got their attention because this was something they hadn't paid a lot of attention to. And now I grabbed their attention because these people, everybody's vying for resources, everybody's vying for budget. And what I was then able to do was take them through a discussion via the sort of story of what our current situation was, how much we spent, where we spent it on a site by site basis, and then drive to a set of options where we could have a very objective based discussion. And that's kind of how we took it. And it surprised me because one of the outcomes was we made a decision in that meeting that we were actually going to exit our long-term headquarters in Palo Alto and move somewhere different because it was the right thing to do. But if I'd have gone there and started the discussion with exiting the headquarters in Palo Alto, probably wouldn't have got such a good response. So to me, it's all about how you can tell the story, how you can use facts, but how you can use other sort of analogies, metaphors, and emotional hooks you got to win the hearts and minds of the people. So facts, I think, are always good because it's much harder to dispute them, but you got to have something that gets people interested. You got to have a hook. So I always try to think about what is the hook that is interesting to this particular audience.
Well, and you got them started on common ground,
Hmm.
right? Which was super key. Nobody started out on opposite ends of the table, metaphorically. Everybody started on common ground. And at that point, you're just a facilitator guiding them towards the decision that you knew you probably was the right one from the get go, right?
Right, yeah. And like I said, there was a bunch of options that we could have taken, but it was interesting where they wanted to start was at what had always previously been a sacred cow discussion. They wanted to start there. So it actually exceeded my expectations from that perspective. It's always interesting. You can set your own expectations, but if you're able to find that common ground, like you said, Catherine, then you'd be amazed at what you can accomplish.
So, do you find that a lot of procurement professionals base their influence and their decision making conversations off of data or emotion?
I think it depends upon the maturity of the professional, the maturity of the organization that they're working from. I actually find that most procurement professionals do use data and do use data really well for driving objective based decisions. I find the thing that they do less well in general is connecting and finding that hook with their client, with their stakeholder. When I first got involved in procurement, when I first came over to the US, it wasn't when I first got involved in procurement. When I first came to the US back in 2000, I was responsible for the global marketing category team. They had savings plans and they had category strategies and things like that. But what I found was that they hadn't aligned any of that with the business groups. They hadn't built them with the business groups in mind. They had really just looked at the category, the marketplace itself, and said, hey, these are the things that we can do to save the company money, etc. And they hadn't really spent the time getting that alignment with the business group. And here's why I think that's important. One of the categories that we bought, and I use this as an example, one of the categories we bought a lot of back in my days in HP was contingent labor. While much of the contingent labor we bought was for internal purposes, staff augmentation and stuff, we also had a services division that it was called enterprise services. And they sold services to customers. And often those services needed to be augmented with external capabilities. We assumed to start with that what the enterprise services group wanted was lower cost resources. But before we went on and created our category strategy and went out to procure those resources, we made sure we aligned it with the business. And what we found was completely different. What they actually wanted was the ability to get those resources hired and on board and working on client accounts quickly. That was more important for them than the cost savings, because every day that those resources were not available was lost revenue and lost margin. So understanding that perspective gave us a different view, and we ended up with a different solution for that particular part of the business that was much more aligned with what their objectives were. So that was super important.
I've seen probably 2 articles in the last week talking about that exactly, aligning your procurement strategies with the business goals. That's such a hurdle. I think a lot of that's changing, and it's really cool to see people writing about that. I just read an article yesterday by Daniel Barnes, who mentioned that that is something that procurement professionals have to change if they're going to move forward. So with all of your experience, and I'm sure with all of the wins and perhaps losses of your career, what would you tell up and coming sourcing heroes? What's your best piece of advice to empower them?
It's a great question. And I think the answer to the question kind of would change, between asking this now. If you ask me in 5 years' time or 5 years ago, maybe I have a different answer. But I think the one thing that would be consistent is getting that business alignment, understanding what it is that your business partner needs. And I'll just use a little analogy there. If you'd have asked people, I don't know when the time period is, 120 years ago, what kind of transport they needed to go faster, they would have said faster horses. Nobody would have said the car. If you think about more recent times, people had cell phones and they could make phone calls, but nobody thought of having a device like an Apple iPhone that could do all these other things. So people don't always necessarily know what they need. They sometimes articulate to you what they want, and you maybe have to dig a little bit deeper. So if I may give an example, as I said, I was running procurement and I was running real estate in HP. And one of my challenges in real estate, so I was kind of my own customer here. So one of my challenges in real estate was I spent a lot of money on energy. And I had a lot of sites. I had 60 million square feet, 700 sites around the world. So we spent a lot of money on energy. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to have more efficient energy products like LED light bulbs instead of incandescent and whatever the other type was, the fluorescent light bulbs. We did a little bit of analysis and we figured out it was going to cost millions of dollars of capital to do that. And I just didn't have the capital to spend on all those light bulbs over all those sites. So we actually thought about it and said, well, instead of us just trying to figure out how to do this, let's ask some of our energy providers. So we got some of these energy companies in, and we told them what the problem was. The problem being, I wanted to reduce my energy costs, not I want new light bulbs. And the answer that came back was one of these companies did basically light bulbs as a service. They changed out all our light bulbs and we pay a subscription. So I immediately got a reduction in my energy costs, which was one of my biggest spend areas. And I didn't have to spend any capital. I could do it all out of operating expense. So that to me is where I would ask or I would coach and advise sort of sourcing heroes to think outside of the box, understand the needs, the true needs. So the need of the real estate group was reduce energy costs. The need wasn't light bulbs, but the real estate group might have asked procurement for cheaper light bulbs, for LED light bulbs. But you've got to ask the right questions to dig down to find out that what the real estate group really wanted was a reduced energy bill. And that, I think, is the piece of advice that I would give, because as you dig further down, you get to really uncover the true need. And then you've got much more latitude to come up with creative solutions to meet that need.
Right. You're going to find the best solution and they're going to go with it, right? You have more chances of them going with the solution you present when you, like you said, dig deeper and ask why.
Absolutely. That is actually, I was thinking about what you said about the sales, the people trying to sell you stuff. They're trying to sell you on feeds and speeds and features and things like that. But the reality is, what they should be looking to do is uncover what value is important to you. And that, I think, is what we should do as sourcing heroes. We should be looking to uncover the value that's important for our internal stakeholders.
So you've got incredible advice for sourcing heroes, but you also have your own business now, the NiVACK Group. Tell me about what you do for your clients within your business now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Catherine. So after I left HP, I retired for a little bit, got bored, and then my son, Charlie, who was working for PwC at the time, and we decided that we would kind of take the expertise that I'd got over 20, 30 years and start to figure out how we could help other smaller businesses that haven't had the opportunity of working at such large scale as I've had, and provide them with advice and coaching to improve their profitability, to really focus on their costs and be more competitive. So we started the NiVACK Group, and our tagline is the smartest way to be more profitable. And we really don't even start the conversation with our clients on cost takeout. We start the conversations about their business, what's important for them, and really trying to understand the barriers that are inhibiting them from becoming more profitable. And the barriers are usually around things like, they have revenue challenges, but they always have cost challenges. There's always, as you dig down, there's always cost challenges in the indirect space and in the procurement arena. And that's where we really come in. We then are able to do an assessment. We deliver a free opportunity assessment where we identify opportunities for them to create some value, to save some money. And then from there, we often end up working with those clients to help them realize some of that value. And we deliver a lot of those services through partners, but that's essentially what we do. And one of the things that we try to do as well is educate and coach and develop those procurement teams so that ultimately they don't need to work with a company like ours in the future, that they have their own capabilities for delivering themselves. And that's really what we do. It's quite simple, and it's really fun. I've got to say, it's really fun. It's got its own challenges because you have to do a lot of things that are not sort of procurement and sourcing related when you're running a business, but it's definitely fun. And I really love being able to help people and being able to take the experience that I've had and other people on my team have had and apply that to their situation so they don't have to learn it themselves. They just know it. They just get it from us.
That's empowering procurement if I've ever heard it. That's amazing. I believe in our earlier conversation, you said that you want to be the very last consultant they ever hire.
Yes, that's right. It's funny. I spent most of my life not wanting to work with consultants because I felt like a lot of the time they didn't really have the expertise. They would run from playbooks, and what we wanted to create was a business, a company that based our results for the client upon the expertise that we had, and then helping them basically to fish themselves so that they don't need to call a company like us in to do that work for them in the future.
And I think as far as procurement is concerned, procurement professionals are tired of having more consultants and more consultants. They probably would appreciate that one last consultant to get them in good shape to fish for themselves going forward.
Well, that's our hope.
So, Nick, where can people find you online?
So they can find us on NiVACK.com, NiVACK.com, or they can reach us through LinkedIn, through my profile, Nick Gunn, or through, again, the NiVACK group on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's NiVACK.com or on LinkedIn and search up Nick Gunn or
For the NiVACK group.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today and for letting us in on your years of experience and the wisdom that you've shared with us. So thank you for that.
It's been my pleasure, Catherine. It's been great talking with you.
Well, I wish you the best with the NiVAC group. I'm sure it's going to go so well, and hope we get to have you back on the show a year from now when you've got more clients than you can handle.
That would be fun, and I would love to come back, and it would be great to do it to do something after we're past COVID, and maybe we can
Yeah,
get live in the studio.
I would love that. All right. Well, Nick, thank you again, and have a great rest of the week.
Yes, you too. Thanks, Catherine.